Hello there. Welcome to part 8 of my reading of Project 2025, Mandate for Leadership, The Conservative Promise. This next section starts with the heading Impenetrable Bureaucracy. I'm on page 111 of a 920-page PDF document. As before, I'm not going to edit out any breaths, mouth noises, or little mistakes. You're going to get this raw and wriggling. Impenetrable Bureaucracy. The GAO has identified almost 100 actions that the executive branch or Congress could take to improve efficiency and effectiveness across 37 areas that span a broad range of government missions and functions. It identified 33 actions to address mission fragmentation, overlap, and duplication in the 12 areas of defense, economic development, health, homeland security, and information technology. It also identified 59 other opportunities for executive agencies or Congress to reduce the cost of government operations or enhance revenue collection across 25 areas of government. A logical place to begin would be to identify and eliminate functions and programs that are duplicated across cabinet departments or spread across multiple agencies. Congress hoped to help this effort by passing the Government Performance and Results Act of 1993, which required all federal agencies to define their missions, establish goals and objectives, and measure and report their performance to Congress. 3 decades of endless, time-consuming reports later, the government continues to grow, but with more paper and little change either in performance or in the number of levels between government and the people. The Brookings Institute's Paul Light emphasizes the importance of the increasing number of levels between the top heads of departments and the people at the bottom who receive the products of government decision-making. He estimates that there are perhaps 50 or more levels of impenetrable bureaucracy and no way other than imperfect performance appraisals to communicate between them. The Trump administration proposed some possible consolidations, but these were not received favorably in Congress, whose approval is necessary for most such proposals. The best solution is to cut functions and budgets and devolve responsibilities. That is a challenge primarily for presidents, Congress, and the entire government, but the OPM still needs to lead the way government-wide in managing personnel properly, even in any future smaller government. Creating a responsible career management service. The people elect a president who is charged by Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution with seeing that the laws are faithfully executed, with his political appointees democratically linked to that legitimizing responsibility. An autonomous bureaucracy has neither independent constitutional status nor separate moral legitimacy. Therefore, career civil servants by themselves should not lead major policy changes and reforms. The creation of the Senior Executive Service was the top career change introduced by the 1978 Carter-Campbell Civil Service Reform Act. Its aim was to professionalize the career service and make it more responsible to the democratically elected commander-in-chief and his political appointees, while respecting the rights due to career employees, very much including those in top positions. The new SES would allow management to be more flexible in filling and reassigning executive positions and locations beyond narrow specialties for more efficient mission accomplishment, and would provide pay and large bonuses to motivate career performance. The desire to infiltrate political appointees improperly into the high career civil service has been widespread in every administration, whether Democrat or Republican. Democratic administrations, however, are typically more successful because they require the cooperation of careerists who generally lean heavily to the left. Such burrowing in requires career job descriptions for new positions that closely mirror the functions of a political appointee, a special hiring authority that allows the bypassing of veterans' preferences as well as other preference categories, and the ability to frustrate career candidates from taking the desired position. President Reagan's OPM began by limiting such SES burrowing in, arguing that the proper course was to create and fill political positions. This simultaneously promotes the CSRA principle of political leadership of the bureaucracy and respects the professional autonomy of the career service. But this requires that career SES employees should respect political rights too. Actions such as career staff reserving excessive numbers of key policy positions as career reserved to deny them to non-career SES employees frustrate CSRA intent. Another evasion is the general domination by career staff on SES personnel evaluation boards, the opposite of non-career executives dominating these critical meeting discussions, as expected in the SES. Career training also often underplays the political role in leadership and inculcates career-first policy and value viewpoints. Frustrated with these activities by top career executives, the Trump administration issued Executive Order 13957 to make career professionals in positions that are not normally subject to change as a result of a presidential transition, but who discharge significant duties and exercise significant discretion in formulating and implementing executive branch policy and programs an exception to the competitive hiring rules and examinations for career positions under a new Schedule F. Did you get all that? It ordered the director of OPM and agency heads to set procedures to prepare lists of such confidential policy determining, policy making, or policy advocating positions and prepare procedures to create exceptions from civil service rules when careerists hold such positions, from which they can relocate back to the regular civil service after such service. The order was subsequently reversed by President Biden at the demand of the civil service associations and unions. It should be reinstated, but SES responsibility should come first. Managing personnel in a union environment. Historically, unions were thought to be incompatible with government management. There is a natural limit to the bargaining power of private sector unions, but the financial bottom line of public sector unions is not similarly constrained. If private sector unions push too hard a bargain, they can so harm a company or so reduce efficiency that their employer is forced to go out of business and eliminate union jobs altogether. There is no such limit in government, which cannot go out of business, so demands can be excessive without negatively affecting employee and union bottom lines. Even Democratic President Franklin Roosevelt considered union representation in the federal government to be incompatible with democracy. Striking and even threats of bargaining and delay were considered acts against the people and thus improper. It was not until President John Kennedy that union representation in the federal government was recognized, and then merely by executive order. Labor bargaining was not set in statute until the Carter administration was forced by Congress to do so in order to pass the CSRA, although all bargaining was placed under OPM review. The CSRA was able to maintain strong management rights for the OPM and agencies and forbade collective bargaining on pay and benefits, as well as management prerogatives. Over time, OPM, FLRA, and agencies' personnel offices and courts, especially in Democratic administrations, narrowed management rights so that labor bargaining expanded as management rights contracted. By the way, they keep using the word democratic incorrectly. Democratic is a description of a form of government. Democrat administrations describes a particular party's administration. But nobody said these people are smart. But the management rights are still in statute, have been enforced by some administrations, and should be enforced again by any future OPM and agency managements, which should not be intimidated by union power. Rather than being daunted, President Trump issued 3 executive orders. Executive Order 13836, encouraging agencies to renegotiate all union collective bargaining agreements to ensure consistency with the law and respect for management rights. Executive Order 13837, encouraging agencies to prevent union representatives from using official time preparing or pursuing grievances or from engaging in other union activity on government time. And Executive Order 13839, encouraging agencies both to limit labor grievances or on removals from service or on challenging performance appraisals, and to prioritize performance over seniority when deciding who should be retained following reductions in force. All were revoked by the Biden administration and should be reinstated by the next administration, to include the immediate appointment of the FLRA General Counsel and reactivation of the impasses panel. Congress should also consider whether public sector unions are appropriate in the first place. The bipartisan consensus up until the middle of the 20th century held that these unions were not compatible with constitutional government. After more than half a century of experience with public sector union frustrations of good government management, it is hard to avoid reaching the same conclusion. Fully staffing the ranks of political appointees. The president must rely legally on his top department and agency officials to run the government and on top White House staff employees to coordinate operations through regular cabinet and other meetings and communications. Without this political leadership, the career civil service becomes empowered to lead the executive branch without democratic legitimacy. Now see, they use the word democratic properly there. While many obstacles stand in his way, a president is constitutionally and statutorily required to fill the top political positions in the executive branch, both to assist him and to provide overall legitimacy. Most presidents have had some difficulty obtaining congressional approval of their appointees, but this has worsened recently. Well, yeah, look at who Trump puts up for positions. After the 2016 election, President Trump faced special hostility from the opposition party and the media in getting his appointees confirmed or even considered by the Senate. His early Office of Presidential Personnel, PPO, did not generally remove political employees from the previous administration, but instead relied mostly on prior political appointees and career civil servants to run the government. Such a reliance on holdovers and bureaucrats led to a lack of agency control and the absolute refusal of the acting Attorney General from the Obama administration to obey a direct order from the president. Under the early PPO, the Trump administration appointed fewer political appointees in its first few months in office than had been appointed in any recent presidency, partly because of historically high partisan congressional obstructions, but also because several officials announced that they preferred fewer political appointees in the agencies as a way to cut federal spending. Whatever the reasoning, this had the effect of permanently hampering the rollout of the new president's agenda. Thus, in those critical early years, much of the government relied on senior careerists and holdover Obama appointees to carry out the sensitive responsibilities that would otherwise belong to the new president's appointees. Fortunately, the later PPO, OPM, and Senate leadership began to cooperate to build a strong team to implement the president's personal appointment agenda. Any new administration would be wise to learn that it will need a full cadre of sound political appointees from the beginning if it expects to direct this enormous federal bureaucracy. A close relationship between the PPO at the White House and the OPM, coordinating with agency assistant secretaries of administration and PPO's chosen White House liaisons and their staff at each agency, is essential to the management of this large, multi-level, resistant, and bureaucratic challenge. If personnel as policy is to be our general guide, it would make sense to give the president direct supervision of the bureaucracy with the OPM director available in his cabinet. A reformed bureaucracy. Today, the federal government's bureaucracy cannot even meet its own civil service ideals. The merit criteria of ability, knowledge, and skills are no longer the basis for recruitment, selection, or advancement, while pay and benefits for comparable work are substantially above those in the private sector. Retention is not based primarily on performance, and for the most part, inadequate performance is not appraised, corrected, or punished. Take note, there are no citations for any of those claims, they just said it. The authors have made many suggestions here that, if implemented, could bring that bureaucracy more under control and enable it to work more efficiently and responsibly, which is especially required for the half of civilian government that administers its undeniable responsibilities for defense and foreign affairs. While a better administered central bureaucracy is crucial for both those and domestic responsibilities, the problem of properly running the government goes beyond simple bureaucratic administration. The specific deficiencies of the federal bureaucracy, size, levels of organization, inefficiency, expense, and lack of responsiveness to political leadership, are rooted in the progressive ideology that unelected experts can and should be trusted to promote the general welfare in just about every area of social life. The Constitution, however, reserved a few enumerated powers to the federal government while leaving the great majority of domestic activities to state, local, and private governance. As James Madison explained, the powers reserved to the several states will extend to all the objects which, in the ordinary course of affairs, concern the lives, liberties, and properties of the people, and the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state. Modern progressive politics has simply given the national government more to do than the complex separation of powers constitution allows. That progressive system has broken down in our time, and the only real solution is for the national government to do less, to decentralize and privatize as much as possible, and then ensure that the remaining bureaucracy is managed effectively along the lines of the enduring principles set out in detail here. Page 119 of 920 on the PDF, it's titled Section 2, The Common Defense. I think I need a drink before I go into this. Today's concoction is beet juice with a flourish of guava that I had left in a can, with some pineapple, some strawberries, some melon, and sparkling water, and single barrel scotch from my beloved Trader Joe's. Oh yeah. All right. The common defense. While the lives of Americans are affected in noteworthy ways, for better or worse, by each part of the executive branch, the inherent importance of national defense and foreign affairs makes the Departments of Defense and State first among equals. Originating in the George Washington administration, the War Department, as it was then known, oh, so that's where they got that from. It was originally the War Department under Washington, was headed by Henry Knox, America's chief artillery officer in the Revolutionary War. Thomas Jefferson, the primary author of the Declaration of Independence, was the first Secretary of State. Despite such long and storied histories, neither department is currently living up to its standards, and the success of the next presidency will be determined in part by whether they can be significantly improved in short order. Ever since our founding, former Acting Secretary of Defense Christopher Miller writes in Chapter 4, Americans have understood that the surest way to avoid war is to be prepared for it in peace. Yet the Department of Defense is a deeply troubled institution. It has emphasized leftist politics over military readiness. I'd like to point out that this chapter is citing another chapter in its own book. Yet the Department of Defense is a deeply troubled institution. It has emphasized leftist politics over military readiness. Recruiting was the worst in 2022 that it has been in 2 generations, and the Biden administration's profoundly unserious equity agenda and vaccine mandates have taken a serious toll. Additionally, Miller writes that the atrophy of our defense industrial base, the impact of sequestration, and effective disarmament by many U.S. allies have exacted a high toll on America's military. Moreover, our military has adopted a risk-averse culture. Think of masked soldiers, sailors, and airmen, rather than instilling and rewarding courage in thought and action. The good news is that most enlisted personnel and most officers, especially below the rank of general or admiral, continue to be patriotic defenders of liberty. But this is now Barack Obama's General Officer Corps. That is why Russ Vought argues in Chapter 2 that the National Security Council should rigorously review all general and flag officer promotions to prioritize the core roles and responsibilities of the military over social engineering and non-defense related matters, including climate change, critical race theory, manufactured extremism, and other polarizing policies that weaken our armed forces and discourage our nation's finest men and women from enlisting. Ensuring that many of America's best and brightest continue to choose military service is essential. By far, the most significant danger to America from abroad, Miller writes, is China. That communist regime is undertaking a historic military buildup, which could result in a nuclear force that matches or exceeds America's own nuclear arsenal. Resisting Chinese expansionist aims requires a denial defense, whereby we make the subordination of Taiwan or other U.S. allies in Asia prohibitively difficult. However, Miller adds that, critically, the United States must be able to do this at a level of cost and risk that Americans are willing to bear. The best gauge of such willingness is congressional approval. Accordingly, we must rediscover and adhere to the founders' wise division of war powers, whereby Congress, the most representative and deliberative branch, decides whether to go to war. Oh, that's timely. Guess they're not following that rule. And the executive, the most energetic and decisive branch, decides how to carry it out once begun, as the past 75 years have repeatedly demonstrated in different ways. From Korea to Vietnam to Iraq to Afghanistan, we depart from our constitutional design at our peril. Wow, something in Project 2025 that I agree with. Miller writes that we must treat missile defense as a top priority, ensure that more of our weapons are made in America, reform the budgeting process, and sustain an efficient and effective counterterrorism enterprise. Across all of our efforts, we must keep in mind that part of peace through strength is knowing when to fight. As George Washington warned nearly 2 centuries ago, we must continue to be on guard against being drawn into conflicts that do not justify great loss of American treasure or significant shedding of American blood. At the same time, we must be prepared to defend our interests and meet challenges where and when they arise. An effective diplomatic corps is central to defending our interests and influencing world events. Whereas most military personnel have had leftist priorities imposed from above, the problem at stake comes largely from within. Former State Department Director of Policy Planning Kieran Skinner writes in Chapter 6, large swaths of the State Department's workforce are left-wing and predisposed to disagree with a conservative president's policy agenda and vision. She adds that the department possesses a belief that it is an independent institution that knows what is best for the United States, sets its own foreign policy, and does not need direction from an elected president, a view that does not align with the Constitution. The solution to this problem is strong political leadership, Skinner writes. The next administration must take swift and decisive steps to reforge the department into a lean and functional diplomatic machine that serves the president and, thereby, the American people. Because the Senate has been extraordinarily lax in fulfilling its constitutional obligation to confirm presidential appointees, she recommends putting appointees into acting roles until such time as the Senate confirms them. Skinner writes that state should also stop skirting the Constitution's treaty-making requirements and stop enforcing agreements as treaties. It should encourage more trade with allies, particularly with Great Britain, and less with adversaries. And it should implement a sovereign Mexico policy, as our neighbor, quote, has functionally lost its sovereignty to muscular criminal cartels that effectively run the country. In Africa, Skinner writes, the U.S. should focus on core security, economic, and human rights, rather than impose radical abortion and pro-LGBT initiatives. Divisive symbols such as the rainbow flag or the Black Lives Matter flag have no place next to the stars and stripes at our embassies. When it comes to China, Skinner writes that a policy of compete where we must, but cooperate where we can, has demonstrably failed. The People's Republic of China, PRC, their aggressive behavior, she writes, can only be curbed through external pressure. Efforts to protect or excuse China must stop. She observes, many were quick to dismiss even the possibility that COVID escaped from a Chinese research laboratory. Meanwhile, Skinner writes, global leaders, including President Joe Biden, have tried to normalize or even laud Chinese behavior. She adds, in some cases, these voices, like global corporate giants like BlackRock and Disney, or the National Basketball Association, NBA, directly benefit from doing business with Beijing. And how many Chinese trade agreements and copyrights does Trump's family have? Hypocrites. Former Vice President of the U.S. Agency for the Global Media, Mora Namdar, I guess the name is Mora Namdar, writes in Chapter 8, oh, they're referring to Chapter 8, that we need to have people working for U.S. AGM who actually believe in America, rather than allowing the agencies to function as anti-American, taxpayer-funded entities that parrot our adversaries' propaganda and talking points. Former Acting Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security Ken Cuccinelli says in Chapter 5 that the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, a creation of the George W. Bush era, should be closed, as it has added needless additional bureaucracy and expense without corresponding benefit. He recommends that it be replaced with a new standalone border and immigration agency at the cabinet level, and that the remaining parts of DHS be distributed among other departments. Well, they didn't do that. Former Chief of Staff for the Director of National Intelligence Dustin Carmack writes in Chapter 7 that the U.S. intelligence community is too inclined to look in the rearview mirror, engaged in groupthink, and employ an overly cautious approach aimed at personnel approval rather than at offering the most accurate, unvarnished intelligence for the benefit of the country. And in Chapter 9, former Acting Deputy... I'm just laughing because of all these references to their own book they're making. And in Chapter 9, former Acting Deputy Administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development, Max Primorak, asserts that the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, must be reformed, writing the Biden administration has deformed the agency by treating it as a global platform to pursue overseas a divisive political and cultural agenda that promotes abortion, climate extremism, gender radicalism, and interventions against perceived systematic racism. And we all know that the main reason for USAID was to help provide health care to people overseas and to promote general welfare with regard to the United States by feeding poor people. And they canceled it and then let all the food and the medical equipment expire. Okay. If the recommendations in the following chapters are adopted, what Skinner says about the State Department could be true for other parts of the federal government's national security and foreign policy apparatus. The next conservative president has the opportunity to restructure the making and execution of U.S. defense and foreign policy and reset the nation's role in the world. The recommendations outlined in this section provide guidance on how the next president should use the federal government's vast resources to do just that. And I think I'm going to stop there on page 123 of 920. The next heading is titled Chapter 4, Department of Defense by Christopher Miller. It's fascinating how Trump's administration has deviated from a lot of the things they were advocating in the last section. Anywho, this recording and all other recordings related to this Project 2025 reading are copyrighted by Douglas Wayne Ricketts. All rights reserved. Unless you agree with me that Project 2025 sucks, then please feel free to use as much of this reading as you want. Thanks for listening.